Rather from becoming the child my parents want, I constantly felt like a burden as I was growing up. My parents, a real estate agent in her early 50s and a corporate lawyer in his mid-50s, were less concerned with raising us and more concerned with preserving their upper-middle-class reputation. They had me at a young age, and I often had the impression that I was more of a hindrance to their way of life than anything else. Outward appearances held paramount importance in our family. Behind closed doors, my parents' lives were far from the picture of success and stability they wanted to portray. Their treatment of me was more akin to that of an unpaid servant than a daughter, something I was unaware of when I was younger. They disregarded or downplayed my accomplishments and aspirations. "It's not a big deal" would be their standard response whenever I'd brought home good marks or received an award. "You are expected to perform admirably." Their perception of my worth shifted over time as I realized that I could lighten their load or preserve their reputation. Things, however, became much worse during my senior year of high school. My mom's job loss came completely out of the blue. She was vague about what transpired, so I have no idea if she was fired or left willingly. My dad's dismissal from the law firm he had worked for so many years occurred around the same period. When they lost both of their jobs, their once perfect lives began to fall apart. Mortgage payments, bills, and all the other expenses they had been able to easily afford were becoming more and more of a struggle for them. All of their bottled-up anger, despair, and financial anxiety came crashing down on me at once. In order to put money down for college and help cover my personal expenditures, I had been working really hard in school while also taking a part-time job. It was a tremendous relief for my parents' financial circumstances when I eventually won a scholarship that would cover most of my tuition. I was hoping for some kind of pride or encouragement when I told them the news, but instead all they could think about was how the scholarship money would benefit the family. It became clear to me that my dad wanted me to stay home, forego the scholarship, and get a job so that I could contribute financially to our family. There was also a time when my mom said that I shouldn't go to college since a real adult would help out their family. I was devastated to hear that the small college savings account that my late grandfather had established for me had been drained in its entirety. They concealed the fact that they had used it to settle some personal debts from me. They just explained why it was essential to keep our family afloat. When I questioned them, they had no apologies. My heart sank. The sensation of having my future stolen from me is something I vividly recall. They didn't care if I succeeded or failed. My hopes, my future, and my own survival seemed to be of less importance to them than their selfish demands. I realized I needed to get out of there at that moment. I decided to go to college on my own, so I packed up my belongings and went to a nearby city when I was 18 years old. In order to pay for school, I worked as a waitress, a tutor, and whatever else I could find to do. Although it was difficult, I was relieved to be apart from them. A sense of liberation had finally arrived, and I was willing to fight for it. I maintained my distance, only contacting them at holidays or for required family calls, in the hopes that the time apart would cause a shift in their perception of me. A few years later, I had my degree in hand and was offered a full-time position in a different state. The position offered a solid income, benefits, and the opportunity to establish a secure life, which were all things I had hoped for. Once again, I packed up and left, this time hundreds of miles away, to begin anew. Having supportive friends, being able to pay for my own apartment, and living life according to my own rules gave me a tremendous sense of liberation. It was all a reality. This was the first place I had ever felt like I belonged. My parents hadn't been in touch with me in over 2 years since we moved. I was under the impression that they had come to terms with the fact that I was no longer going to bend over backwards to meet their demands. However, they reached out to me a week ago to let me know that they were arranging a reunion and bringing a special surprise to my visit. They kept saying that I would be so happy when I got this surprise and acted as though nothing had happened, like we were just a normal family that had simply lost touch. Their message left me stunned. Here they were, reaching out after years of silence, pretending as if they hadn't manipulated and controlled me all my life. They were acting like we had some wonderful family bond that could be reignited with a simple visit. They hinted that their surprise would make things right between us, whatever that was supposed to mean. Given our history, I couldn't help but feel suspicious. Every surprise they'd ever had for me was a way to guilt trip or manipulate me. When I politely declined their visit, they didn't take it well. I soon began receiving messages from other family members, all trying to guilt me into changing my mind. They said things like, "Your parents are reaching out because they miss you, and it's time to let the past go." Some even hinted that I was being too harsh and that my parents were only trying to make amends. It felt like everyone had conveniently forgotten all the sacrifices I'd made just to break free from their control. The guilt tripping continued, with messages suggesting that family is family no matter what, and that everybody deserves a second chance. But after everything I'd been through, did I really owe them another chance? I spent years carrying the weight of their mistakes, sacrificing my peace, my savings, and my dreams to help them maintain their perfect image. I had put my own life on hold just to keep them afloat, only to be discarded when they no longer needed me. Now that I had finally built something for myself, they wanted back in. So here I am, torn between the family I was born into and the life I fought to create on my own. Part of me wonders if I'm wrong for wanting to keep my distance, for finally choosing myself over the people who only saw me as a means to their own ends. I know what my parents are capable of, and I know that this surprise is likely just another way to manipulate me. But I also can't shake the feeling of guilt they've instilled in me, the feeling that maybe I owe them something just because they're my parents. Am I in the wrong for wanting to be free after everything my parents put me through? Am I wrong for refusing to let them back in when I finally have a chance to live on my own terms? Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone for the outpouring of support, comments, messages. It's overwhelming in the best way possible. It's so heartening to hear from so many people who have been through similar situations and to receive advice from those who understand how hard it can be to set boundaries with family. Reading through all of your experiences has really helped me gain clarity about my own. Many of you pointed out something I'd missed initially, that my parents' whole approach to reconciling, by showing up unannounced and dangling a surprise in front of me, especially a financial one, proves they still don't understand the impact of their behavior. If anything, it seems they still think of me as someone they can control or appease with money instead of addressing the root issues. After posting the main story, things actually escalated on their own. Yesterday morning, I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister, who has always been more of a bystander than a supporter, but occasionally reaches out to give family advice. She didn't waste any time asking me why I had refused to let my parents visit or what was going on. Apparently, my parents had confided in her about their plans, including this surprise they were so eager to spring on me. According to my aunt, my parents have supposedly been seeing a family therapist for the past year. They told her they'd been reflecting on how they treated me in the past and had come to realize their mistakes. The surprise they'd been planning was, according to my aunt, a trust fund they'd set up in my name using some of their savings as an apology and as a way to make things right. They believed this gesture could mend our relationship and show me they were committed to change. Hearing about the trust fund just confused me. On one hand, the fact that they had saved up to create something they thought would benefit me felt like an acknowledgement of some sort, and part of me wanted to believe they genuinely changed. But then, as I thought more about it, I felt frustrated that their so-called reconciliation plan still revolved around money and grand gestures, the exact things that created the distance between us in the first place. It felt like they were trying to buy my forgiveness rather than work on the relationship through open communication and respect. After hearing my aunt's story, I decided it was time to address this directly. I sat down yesterday evening and wrote a long email to my parents, laying everything out. I thanked them for the effort they claimed to have put into therapy and acknowledged that it was a big step if they were really taking responsibility for the way they treated me. But I also explained that surprising me with a visit and using a financial gesture as a means of apology wasn't the right way to start rebuilding our relationship. I told them bluntly that if they were serious about moving forward, it needed to start with respect for my boundaries and a willingness to communicate directly about what happened, not by trying to buy forgiveness. In the email, I was very clear that I wouldn't be accepting any visits or meetings unless we first established some ground rules. I suggested we start with regular phone calls or messages where we could both gradually build trust and discuss past issues in a way that feels safe for me. I explained that rebuilding our relationship would take time and that I needed to see sustained change, not just a one-time gift or gesture. I even mentioned that if their therapy is truly helping, they should know that reconciliation takes work, not just money or big surprises. After hitting send, I felt a huge wave of relief. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I was setting the terms of how this would go. The next morning, I received a response from my parents, and it was a lot. They were polite at first, saying they appreciated my honesty and were open to following my lead if it meant fixing things. But then, as the email went on, it was clear they were already backpedaling. My mother wrote paragraphs about how families shouldn't need rules or formal boundaries, and that if I truly wanted to make amends, I should have been more willing to let them visit and talk in person. My father's part was more straightforward. He felt hurt that I rejected their gift, saying it took them a lot of effort, and that he felt disrespected by my refusal to accept their attempt at reconciliation. It felt like they were shifting the blame onto me, implying that by setting boundaries, I was the one refusing to reconcile. As if that wasn't enough, my mother also included a line about how I've always been an independent to a fault, which stung. I realized then that they hadn't really changed. They were still framing everything as my fault, my inability to be family-oriented or forgiving enough. Reading through it felt like another slap in the face, as if they were ignoring everything I'd shared about my struggles and still twisting it to make me seem ungrateful. Later that evening, I got another call from my aunt. She had clearly spoken to my parents after they'd received my email and was now calling to reason with me, though it felt more like a guilt trip. She kept saying things like, "They're really trying, It's not easy for them either, and maybe you're being a bit too harsh. They only want to show they've changed." She even mentioned that their therapist had apparently encouraged them to reach out, and that their surprise fund was a product of these sessions, as if that somehow justified their entire approach. It felt as though everyone was trying to convince me that accepting their gesture would fix everything, when deep down, I knew it wouldn't. By the end of the conversation with my aunt, I was exhausted. I was mentally drained from having to explain over and over that a one-time grand gesture isn't a replacement for years of genuine effort or accountability. I kept asking myself, why couldn't they just respect what I needed? Why was it so hard for them to communicate with me directly and consistently? All of this felt like more of the same manipulation I'd grown up with, just dressed up in different words and actions. I felt like I'm being pushed into a corner. It's almost as though by setting boundaries, I'm being punished or accused of not trying hard enough to fix things. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to be forced into playing the role of the ungrateful daughter just because I'm not bending to their version of getting back to how things were. And now, with family members pressuring me to change my stance, I feel like I'm back to square one, trying to defend my choices and my autonomy. After everything I've been through, I know I don't deserve this. I've worked hard to build a life on my own, to be free from the manipulation and control that defined my childhood. Update 2. I truly didn't expect things to escalate as much as they have in the past few days. After sending that last email and being firm about my boundaries, I had hoped that my parents would take a step back and respect my decision. But things have only gotten more complicated, and I'm starting to see just how far they're willing to go to reassert control over me. 2 days after my last post, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. It simply read, "Hope you're doing well in your new city. Don't think you can hide forever. We'll see you soon." My heart stopped. I immediately assumed it was spam or some random scam message, but as I reread it, something about the tone felt too familiar. It was similar to the way my father would leave me reminders or messages when he wanted me to feel guilty or anxious about something. I tried to brush it off, but it definitely rattled me. Later that day, I received an email from my father. It was a long, formal-sounding message where he said he'd been disappointed by my responses and lack of willingness to accept their hand of reconciliation. He didn't outright threaten anything, but the language was pointed. He mentioned how I was their only child and that, as their daughter, it was my moral responsibility to show some respect, meet them halfway, and at least consider their attempts to reconcile. There was also a line about how they had invested so much in my education, my upbringing, and that now was not the time to repay them with silence and distance. Reading between the lines, it felt like he was implying that my success and independence were somehow things I owed to them, and it was my duty to keep them close out of gratitude. I was furious, but it also confirmed my fear. They weren't going to respect my space. That evening, I called a close friend who had known me and my family for years. She listened to everything and then calmly reminded me that my parents have always pushed boundaries, and this was probably their way of testing how much I would take before I finally gave in. She told me it was okay to keep my distance and that I wasn't obligated to let them back into my life on their terms, especially if it was causing me so much stress. I felt a wave of relief knowing I wasn't alone in feeling like their behavior was manipulative, but it didn't stop there. The next day, I noticed my parents had both followed me on Instagram, a platform I had used to stay connected with college friends, but it kept private without any family members. I hadn't blocked them before since they'd never used social media much, but it was unsettling to see them pop up now. Even stranger, I noticed my mother had liked some old posts on my profile, the last one from about 2 years ago when I first moved to this new state for work. It felt like they were going out of their way to leave a mark, like they were reminding me they could still keep an eye on me. That night, I got a message from my aunt again. She asked if I'd spoken to my parents recently, saying they were worried and didn't know how else to reach me since I'd been so closed off. She told me they knew where I lived and hinted that they were considering flying over for a quick visit to talk things out. My aunt played it off as if it was no big deal, saying they just wanted to set things straight and were only showing up to give me some clarity about their intentions. But the way she spoke made it clear that they'd already made up their minds to show up. My aunt even added that I was overreacting and that this situation wasn't as big of a deal as I was making it out to be. The worst part of it all was realizing they knew exactly where I lived. When I first moved here 2 years ago, I'd never shared my address with them, hoping for a fresh start without the constant worry of them interfering in my life. It struck me that they might have found my address through other relatives or maybe even through an online search. Knowing how persistent they can be, it sent chills down my spine to think they'd been quietly keeping tabs on me. I was horrified, but not entirely surprised. Feeling on edge, I emailed my parents again, making it very clear that I wasn't comfortable with any surprise visits and reminding them again that I needed space. I explained that if they truly wanted to make amends, it would have to be done respectfully and without trying to track me down or follow me online. I thought my tone was polite but firm, hoping that if they read it carefully, they'd realize that showing up uninvited would only push me further away. Their response came quickly. My mother replied with a long guilt-tripping message about how they couldn't believe I was treating them like strangers and how it broke their hearts to see me so distant and ungrateful after all they'd done for me. She talked about how family should always be there for each other and how they were just trying to support me in a way they thought I would appreciate. It was all framed as if they were doing me some grand favor by being persistent, and I was too stubborn to understand their love. She even said that someday I'd look back and regret pushing them away when all they wanted was to help me heal from the past. After reading that, I was done. I felt drained mentally and emotionally from trying to hold my ground and constantly having to explain my perspective. I took a few hours to collect myself and then sent one final message firmly stating that if they showed up at my home uninvited, I would call the police. I made it very clear that I was serious, that this wasn't a negotiation, and that if they truly respected me, they would back off and allow me to live my life without interference. The next day, I heard from a cousin on my father's side who rarely ever calls me. She'd heard through the grapevine that I'd threatened my parents with police action, and she wanted to know what was going on. At this point, I felt like my life had become some kind of twisted family soap opera, with everyone getting involved and throwing their opinions at me. My cousin kept saying things like, "Your parents have been through so much, and isn't there a way to work this out peacefully?" I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like they were all reading from the same script, trying to guilt me into complying with whatever narrative my parents had spun for them. In a moment of desperation, I ended up going through my social media profiles and adjusting all my privacy settings, even going so far as to block certain family members who had shown an interest in meddling. I also decided to get a P.O. box for any future mail, because it dawned on me that they might start sending letters to my home address if I continued to resist their attempts to contact me. One last thing happened yesterday that solidified my decision to keep my boundaries strong. I got a notification from my apartment's management office saying there was a visitor asking to confirm if I lived there. Thankfully, the staff member at the desk didn't give them any information, but the description sounded eerily like my father. I felt my heart race as I realized just how far they were willing to go. It was as if they thought if they just showed up, they could break through my defenses and convince me to let them back in. So here I am now, still standing my ground, but feeling a mix of exhaustion and fear. I spent years building my independence and learning how to stand up for myself. But this entire ordeal has made me question just how much strength I have left to keep fighting them off. Part of me feels a small pang of guilt, wondering if they'll ever truly understand why I need this space or if they're genuinely just lost in their own perspective. But then I remember the years of manipulation, the emotional blackmail, and the constant reminder that my life was never fully my own around them. Update 3. Hello people, it's been almost a month since everything escalated, and thankfully, a lot has happened since. I have some good news that's given me a bit of peace. My boyfriend and I decided it was time to move into a new place together. We were planning this for a while, but after this whole incident with my parents, we just became more sure about it. We found a small but cozy apartment a few towns over that felt like a fresh start, away from the old address my parents had somehow tracked down. We finalized the move just last week, and while I'm still keeping my guard up, I feel like there's finally some space between me and their reach. It's a big relief knowing they'd have to work even harder to track me down again. Throughout all this, I've stayed in close contact with my friend, who's been my sounding board through these chaotic weeks. She recently attended a gathering that my parents happened to be at as well. I wasn't thrilled to know they'd be in the same room, but I trusted her judgment. Apparently, my parents have taken their narrative to a new level. They've been telling anyone who'll listen that I've abandoned them, that I am ungrateful, and that they raised me with nothing but love, only for me to walk out and disrespect them. My friend kept her cool at first, just listening to what they were saying without interrupting, but things escalated. According to her, they painted a picture of me as some spoiled, bratty kid who had used them up and left once I didn't need them anymore. They spoke about my disrespect for family values and how heartbroken they were by my refusal to forgive them. My mother apparently even went so far as to talk about all the things they'd supposedly sacrificed for me growing up, spitting it as if I turned my back on my duties to them. I was absolutely disgusted to hear this. Everything they were saying was so twisted, a warped view of reality. I'd lived through. It hurt to know they were spreading this story about me to people who didn't know any better. But what else could we expect from them, right? But my friend didn't let it slide. She stepped in directly, called them out in front of everyone, and laid down the truth. She told everyone there about the years of manipulation and emotional abuse they'd put me through, about how they'd repeatedly dismissed and controlled me, used me for financial help when it suited them, and only turned to me now out of convenience. She brought up the fact that they tried to track me down, ignored my boundaries, and even attempted to show up unannounced despite me asking them not to. She didn't hold back on any of it. I was in shock hearing her recount it. She truly went to bat for me in a way I didn't even know I needed. The most surprising part was that my parents didn't deny a single thing she said. They sat there quietly listening with only occasional mutterings of, "We did a lot for her," or, "But she's our daughter." Not once did they attempt to refute what she was saying. They didn't deny their actions or explain their side. They just looked uncomfortable and embarrassed. From what my friend told me, it was clear that for once they were facing people who weren't going to automatically take their side. They couldn't control the narrative anymore, and I think it finally hit them just how much they'd messed up. After that, my friend said there was a noticeable shift in how people were interacting with my parents. They lost that social status they had once relied on. People who used to flock to them were now keeping their distance, unwilling to get involved in the mess they'd created. They were left to fend for themselves, stripped of the support they'd always leaned on to boost their image. I didn't realize until then how much they valued that external validation and how important it was for them to be seen as respected members of the community. Now that they'd been exposed, they'd lost the facade that made them feel powerful and in control. Despite this, they didn't stop trying to get through to me. I received constant messages and emails from both of them filled with emotional pleas and occasional attempts at guilt-tripping me. Some long drawn-out letters about how I'm breaking up the family, tearing them apart, and disappointing them in ways they never thought possible. They've even tried calling from blocked numbers, leaving me lengthy voicemails that I've stopped listening to altogether. I felt the need to take a firmer stance after this continued for some time. I threatened to contact the authorities if they persisted in their harassment, and I sent them a final, straightforward email making my intentions quite clear. I made it clear that what they were doing may be considered stalking, and I threatened to seek a restraining order if they persisted. I was hoping that by threatening legal action, they would finally get the point about my boundaries, so I was as explicit as possible. Tensions rose during the next days. My mom sent me one final email, and it was full of dramatic claims about how she and my dad had just wanted what was best for me, and how I was discarding the one family I had. She penned a short statement that I can only assume was meant to make me scared. One day you'll regret this decision. When you look back, you'll ask yourself why you were so stubborn about letting go. The subtle provocation had before irritated me, but now it strengthened my conviction that I was acting morally. There was a lull following that final message. As if I were finally starting to regain the freedom I had fought for, I felt a tremendous burden ease off my shoulders. The strangest sensation hit me when I considered the possibility that they might be pulling back. The silence is a relief for the time being, even though I have no idea if they have genuinely stopped trying to contact me.
I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but I need to get it off my chest. My name's Robin, and I'm 45 years old. I own a pretty successful restaurant in the city, something I built from the ground up and am genuinely proud of. 5 years ago, that restaurant brought someone special into my life, or at least I thought he was special at the time. James, not his real name, was a contractor I hired for some renovation work. He was charming, hardworking, and had these kind eyes that made me feel like I could trust him. During the renovations, we started talking more and more. He told me about his daughter, Lisa, who was 13 at the time, and how he'd been raising her alone since his ex-wife lost custody due to her drinking problem. I found myself looking forward to our meetings, and eventually, James asked me out for coffee. That coffee turned into dinner, dinner turned into dating, and before I knew it, we were talking about marriage. Everything seemed perfect. James was attentive, Lisa was sweet, and I felt like I'd finally found the family I'd always wanted. We got married a year after we started dating. James and Lisa moved into my house, and at first, everything was wonderful. I threw myself into being the best stepmom I could be. Lisa and I would cook together, go shopping, and I made sure she had everything she needed. I paid for family vacations, bought her clothes, and tried to give her the kind of life I wished I'd had at her age. Lisa did see her mom occasionally, something I wasn't totally comfortable with, given what I knew about her history. Apparently, she'd almost burned their house down multiple times while drunk, which is why she lost custody. But James insisted it was important for Lisa to maintain that connection, and her mom had supposedly gotten sober. She's still her mother, he'd say whenever I expressed concern. Lisa needs to know her mom still cares about her. The one time I saw Lisa's mom at a school event, she didn't look sober to me. There was something about the way she swayed slightly while standing still, how her eyes couldn't quite focus. But I kept my mouth shut. After all, who was I to interfere? I was just the stepmom, right? God, if I'd only known then what I know now. If I'd only realized that my desire to be the perfect stepmom was blinding me to what was really going on. But hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? And the real trouble hadn't even started yet. Not even close. Time flew by, and before I knew it, Lisa was turning 18. She was stressed about both her upcoming birthday and graduation, pacing around the house like a nervous wreck. What if something goes wrong, she kept saying. What if people don't come? What if it's not perfect? I pulled her into a hug one evening when I found her overthinking everything again. Hey, everything's going to be fine, I told her. In fact, I have an idea, why don't we have your party at the restaurant? We'll book the best tables in the house. Her eyes lit up immediately. I knew my restaurant had become quite the hotspot in town, and Lisa had been dying to show it off to her friends. Really? She squealed, already pulling out her phone. Oh my God, my Instagram is going to be so lit. Everyone at school is going to be so jealous. I threw myself into the preparations. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for her. I even took her shopping for a dress, this gorgeous blue number that made her look so grown up, I almost cried in the fitting room. How many people are you thinking of inviting? I asked her while we were going over the details one evening. She hesitated for a moment, fidgeting with her napkin. About 30 people? Great, can you get me a guest list so I can make sure we have enough space and food for everyone? Oh, I haven't really made one yet, she said quickly. Just plan for 30, okay? Looking back, I should have pressed harder about that list. But I was so caught up in making everything perfect that I just nodded and moved on. The day of the party arrived, and everything looked amazing. The tables were beautifully decorated, the food was perfect, and Lisa looked stunning in her new dress. James's relatives were there, Lisa's friends were taking selfies everywhere, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. And then she walked in. I recognized Lisa's mom immediately, even though she was swaying slightly on her feet. She was clearly drunk, her eyes glassy as she announced to everyone that she was here to wish her daughter happy birthday. I was sitting next to Lisa when her mom stumbled over to our table. She glared at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Get up, she demanded, waving her hand at me. That's my seat. I'm her real mother, not you. I tried to keep my voice calm and reasonable. There are plenty of empty seats at the next table with the other guests. Why don't you join them? No, she practically shouted. This is my place. You need to get out of my place. Who do you think you are? I looked at James, desperately hoping he'd say something, do something, anything to defuse the situation. But my husband just sat there, his face red, staring down at his plate like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the scene unfolding in my restaurant. This was Lisa's special day, and I wasn't about to let it be completely ruined if I could help it. "Let me be very clear," I said, looking directly at Lisa's mom. "You have two choices. You can either take a seat at the next table with the other guests, or I can have security escort you out." Her face contorted with rage. "Oh, listen to you. Little Miss Moneybags," throwing her weight around. She staggered slightly, grabbing the edge of the table to steady herself. "You think you can buy everything, don't you? Buy my husband, buy my daughter's love?" The other diners were starting to stare. I could see my regular customers at nearby tables, trying not to look while obviously listening to every word. My staff were hovering uncertainly at the edges of the room, waiting for my signal. "You just waltz in here with your fancy restaurant and your big house," Lisa's mom continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "Think you can replace me because you've got money? Well, guess what? You can't buy family." Before anyone could react, she grabbed a plate of food and hurled it to the floor. The crash of breaking china seemed to echo through the suddenly silent restaurant. Then another plate followed, and another. Food splattered across the expensive carpet I just had installed last month. I caught my security team's eye and gave them a subtle nod. They moved in smoothly, professionally, just as they'd been trained. "Ma'am, it's time for you to leave," the head of security said firmly, taking her arm. I watched as they escorted her out, her screams echoing down the hallway until the front door finally closed behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood up, plastering on my best restaurant owner smile. "I'm so sorry for the disturbance, everyone. Please, enjoy your meals." Another round of drinks for all tables on the house. The regular customers seemed to take this in stride, returning to their conversations after a few minutes. But at our tables, where Lisa's friends and family sat, the whispers were constant. I could see them shooting glances at Lisa, at James, at me. The story would be all over social media by morning, I was sure. Lisa sat there, pale as a ghost, pushing food around her plate. The beautiful blue dress suddenly seemed to dwarf her, making her look young and vulnerable. The Instagram-perfect party she'd dreamed of had turned into a nightmare. "I have a headache," she said after about an hour, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we go home?" The party broke up quickly after that. Everyone made polite excuses, but I could hear them whispering as they left. "Poor Lisa. Did you see her mom? Can you believe what happened?" As soon as we got home, Lisa went straight to her room. I followed her upstairs, wanting to talk, to comfort her somehow. "Lisa, honey, can we talk?" I need to be alone right now," she said, closing the door in my face. I found James in the kitchen, staring into a glass of whiskey. "Did you invite her?" I asked quietly. "Did you tell your ex-wife about the party?" He shook his head. "No, I wouldn't do that." And suddenly it all clicked, why Lisa had been so evasive about the guest list, why she'd refused to show it to me. She had invited her mother herself. Despite everything, despite the history, despite the custody issues, she'd wanted her mom there. The morning after the birthday disaster, Lisa came down to breakfast looking like she hadn't slept at all. She slid into her usual chair, not making eye contact with anyone. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and normal. "Fine," she muttered, staring at her cereal bowl. And that was it. One word. The days that followed were like living in a ghost house. Lisa went from being my chatty, bubbly stepdaughter to practically a stranger. Whenever I walked into a room where she was talking with James, she'd immediately clam up. It was like someone had hit a mute button. I tried to talk to James about it one night after Lisa had gone to bed. "Don't you think we should do something? Maybe get her to talk to someone?" He just waved his hand dismissively. "She's fine. She's just processing what happened. Give her space." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. Despite the tension at home, we all showed up for Lisa's graduation ceremony. James and I sat in the audience, and I clapped until my hands hurt when they called her name. She looked beautiful in her cap and gown, and for a moment, when she glanced our way and smiled, I thought maybe things were finally getting better. We had a celebration at our house afterward. I'd ordered all of Lisa's favorite dishes from the restaurant, the mushroom risotto she loved, those little crab cakes she always stole from the kitchen when she visited me at work, even that ridiculous chocolate cake that takes 3 days to make properly. Her classmates came over, and the house was full of laughter and excited chatter about college plans and summer vacations. For a few hours, it felt almost normal again. Lisa was smiling, talking, looking like her old self. I started to relax, thinking maybe we'd turned a corner. Then her phone rang. Lisa stepped into the hallway to answer it, but came back a few minutes later with a determined look on her face. She walked straight up to me, the first time she'd voluntarily approached me in days. "My mom's coming over," she announced. "She wants to congratulate me on graduating." My stomach dropped. "Absolutely not," I said, memories of the birthday disaster still fresh in my mind. "Lisa, think about what happened at your birthday. She showed up drunk, caused a scene, destroyed property. That was your fault." Lisa cut me off, her voice rising. "None of that would have happened if you'd just given up your seat to her. She's my real mom, you should have just moved." I stood there, feeling like I'd been slapped. All this time, all these days of silence, and this was what she'd been thinking? That I was the one to blame? I turned to James, desperately hoping he'd finally step up and be the father his daughter needed. "James, please. Tell her. Tell her how inappropriate her mother's behavior was at the birthday party." But James just sat there, examining his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. The same deafening silence I'd gotten used to lately. The same cowardly retreat I'd seen at the restaurant. Something inside me snapped. 5 years of trying to be the perfect stepmom, of walking on eggshells, of making excuses for everyone else's behavior, it all came pouring out. "Listen," I said to Lisa. "That was my restaurant. I arranged that entire party for you. I bought you that dress you wanted so badly. I did everything I could to make it perfect. And your mother? She showed up drunk, caused a scene, and destroyed property. She didn't even bring you a present, Lisa. All she brought was chaos and embarrassment." Lisa's face went from angry to furious in an instant. "Oh my God, here we go," she shouted, throwing her hands up. "It's always about the money with you, isn't it? I paid for this, I bought that. You think because you have money, you can control everyone and everything." She spun around to face her classmates, who were standing awkwardly in our living room, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "My real mom will be here soon," she announced with a bitter laugh. "It'll be nice to finally have a normal person here instead of this." She gestured at me like I was something disgusting she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Your mother is not coming into this house," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger and hurt building inside me. "Not after what happened at the restaurant." That was when Lisa completely lost it. Her face turned red, and she started screaming at me in front of everyone. "You're not my mother," she shrieked. "You're nothing to me. You're nobody. Who do you think you are to tell me what to do? Keep your filthy nose out of my business. You're just some woman my dad married for her money." The room went dead silent. I could see Lisa's friends shifting uncomfortably, some staring at their phones, others finding the ceiling suddenly fascinating. Lisa turned to her friends, her voice dripping with venom. "Let's get out of here. I don't want to celebrate in her house anyway." She emphasized the word her like it was something dirty. They all filed out quickly, nobody making eye contact with me. The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. I stood there in my empty living room, surrounded by half-eaten food and abandoned plates, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Surely now, finally, James would say something. He'd have to stand up for me after this, right? James cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was cold and hard. "You had no right to throw the house and money in her face like that. You didn't need to remind her that this is your house and your money paid for everything." That was low. I stared at him, feeling like I was seeing him clearly for the first time, Are you kidding me right now? Where were you when your ex-wife was throwing plates around my restaurant? Where were you just now when your daughter was screaming insults at me in front of her entire graduating class? You're the adult here, he snapped. You should know better than to get into arguments with a teenager. And you should know better than to bury your head in the sand like a coward, I shot back. But that's what you do, isn't it? You just sit there silently while your ex-wife and your daughter treat me like garbage. Well, guess what? I'm done being everyone's punching bag. James's face turned an even darker shade of red. Without another word, he stormed off upstairs. I heard the guest room door slam a few minutes later. The next morning's breakfast was like sitting in a morgue. James pushed his eggs around his plate, not looking at me. I was about to get up and leave when Lisa stumbled in, still wearing her clothes from the graduation party. The smell of alcohol hit me before she even made it to the table. I looked at James, waiting for him to say something, anything, about our teenage daughter coming home drunk at 9 a.m. But he just kept studying those fascinating eggs. Where have you been all night? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Lisa turned to me, her bloodshot eyes filled with contempt. None of your business, she sneered. You're not my mother. You're not anyone. Just an empty space taking up room in this house. Then she turned and stumbled upstairs to bed. James just sat there, silent as always. I was starting to think silence was his superpower. The next week was like living in a house with a particularly vindictive ghost. Lisa wouldn't speak to me directly at all. Instead, she'd talk about me like I wasn't even there. Dad, she'd say, pointing at me like I was a piece of furniture, can you ask your wife to pass the salt? Or she'd walk into a room and announce to James, this woman is in my way, waiting for me to move. I kept my mouth shut and watched it all unfold. After 5 years of trying to be the perfect stepmom, I was done. Let them show their true colors. And boy, did they ever. It was Sunday, and James and I were having another silent dinner when Lisa burst into the dining room, waving an envelope like she'd won the lottery. Dad, I got in, she shouted, practically dancing around the table. Berkeley accepted me. I got into my dream school. I watched as she hugged her father, both of them grinning ear to ear. Then Lisa turned to him and said, with a smirk I'll never forget, tell your wife she needs to pay for my tuition. Something inside me just snapped. I smiled, not a nice smile, and said clearly, I won't be paying for your college education. You've made it very clear that I'm not your mother. I'm nobody, remember? Just an empty space? Well, this empty space's wallet is closed. Why don't you ask your real mother to pay for college? Lisa's face turned an alarming shade of red. You vindictive bitch, she screamed, tears starting to stream down her face. You're doing this to punish me. You're just evil. I stood there, feeling strangely calm as she hurled insult after insult at me. It was like watching a storm through a window. I could see the chaos, but it couldn't touch me anymore. Dad, she whirled around to face James. Make her pay. She has to pay, tell her. James cleared his throat, using that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Come on, honey, stop joking around. You know you need to pay for Lisa's education. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I've made myself perfectly clear. I will not pay tens of thousands of dollars in tuition for someone who has spent weeks telling me I'm nothing to her. Someone who treats me like I'm less than dirt in my own home. I turned and walked out of the dining room, Lisa's screams following me up the stairs. I could hear her throwing what sounded like another spectacular tantrum, plates crashing, chairs scraping, theatrical sobs. Like mother, like daughter, I thought grimly. I sat in my bedroom, listening to the chaos downstairs slowly die down. I knew it wasn't over. James would be up soon enough, ready to play his part in this family drama. Sure enough, about 30 minutes later, my bedroom door burst open. James stormed in, his face flushed with anger. I'm sick of this, he spat. I'm so tired of you playing these games. You need to grow up and pay for Lisa's education. I looked at him calmly from where I sat on our bed. No. You and your ex-wife can figure out how to pay for Berkeley. I'm sure between the two of you, you can work something out. He started pacing the room like a caged animal. You're being completely selfish. She's just a teenager, for God's sake. You're the adult here, you need to be the bigger person. I watched him pace, remembering all the times he'd used that same argument. Be the bigger person, let it go, she's just a kid. Always making excuses, always expecting me to smile and nod and open my wallet while they treated me like garbage. A teenager who's old enough to know better, I said quietly. A teenager who's made it very clear how she feels about me. Why should I invest in her future when she's shown nothing but contempt for me? James stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression hard. Fine, then let me make this simple for you. Either you pay for Lisa's education, or I'm filing for divorce. He clearly expected me to cave. To break down crying, or beg him not to leave, or immediately agree to pay. That's what the bigger person would do, right? I shrugged. Okay, get a divorce. The look on his face was almost comical. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. He clearly hadn't expected me to call his bluff. I'll call my lawyer first thing tomorrow morning, I added, my voice steady. In the meantime, you and Lisa should start looking for a new place to live. James stood there for what felt like forever, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Finally, without a word, he turned and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. The next morning, I walked downstairs to find James and Lisa sitting at the dining room table, waiting for me like some kind of ambush. The scene was perfectly staged it, Lisa with her red-rimmed eyes, James with his practiced concerned father expression. Honey, James said, smiling that manipulative smile I'd somehow never noticed before, we've all had a chance to calm down and think about things. Lisa nodded eagerly, like a well-trained puppet. We all overreacted yesterday, she added, her voice sweet as honey. I stood in the doorway, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me. It was like I was seeing them both for the first time, really seeing them. The thing is, James continued, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used when he wanted something, we're family. Families fight, but they also make up. And since you were the one who escalated things with this college situation, it would mean a lot if you took the first step toward reconciliation. Lisa jumped in right on cue. Yeah, and if you helped with tuition, it would show that you're really sorry and want to make things right. I almost laughed. They really thought they could manipulate me this easily? That all it would take was some fake remorse and practiced lines about family? Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I just got off the phone with my lawyer 5 minutes ago. The divorce papers should be ready by this afternoon. The change in their expressions was instantaneous. Lisa's sweet smile vanished, replaced by shock. James's face turned that familiar shade of angry red. I turned to Lisa. Congratulations. You won't have to deal with your not mother interfering in your life anymore. Isn't that what you wanted? Lisa burst into tears, real ones this time, not the calculated ones from before. But I was done being manipulated by teenage tears. James stood up so fast, his chair fell over. Without a word, he stormed upstairs. I could hear him yanking drawers open, slamming closet doors. They packed in silence. No more manipulative speeches, no more fake tears. Just the sound of suitcases being filled and doors being slammed. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The messages started that night. First from James. We all said things we regret. Let's talk about this like adults. Then from Lisa. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but you're being really unfair about college. When I didn't respond, they got nastier. You're destroying this family with your stubbornness. I hope you're happy being alone with your money. You'll regret this when you're old and have nobody. The divorce was quick, thanks to the prenup I'd insisted on. James tried to contest it, of course, but my lawyer shut that down fast. He got nothing, not a penny of my restaurant's profits, not a dime of my savings. I hear things about them sometimes, through mutual friends. They're living in a small apartment across town. Lisa couldn't afford Berkeley and is working at a mall somewhere. James is trying to restart his contracting business, but it's not going well. I've redecorated the house since they left. Threw out all the furniture that reminded me of them. The place feels bigger now, lighter somehow. Or maybe that's just me, finally free of the weight of trying to buy love from people who were only ever interested in selling.
This story is titled, "My Brother Slept with My Fiancée and Got Her Pregnant. My Mom Blamed Me and Demanded I Took Care of the Child." Hey everyone! If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps our channel. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "Growing up, it didn't take a genius to figure out who my mom's favorite was. It was Alex, my younger brother. It wasn't like she ever said it outright, but her actions made it glaringly obvious. The way she coddled him, praised him, and defended him no matter what, it was like he could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. If anything went wrong, even if I wasn't involved, it was somehow my fault. Take the vase incident, for example. Mom had this expensive vase she loved, always talking about how it was a family heirloom or something. One day, Alex, who was maybe 8 at the time, broke it while playing soccer in the house. I was upstairs doing homework when I heard the crash. Before I even reached the scene, Mom was already yelling at me. "Why weren't you watching him, Liam? You're older, you should have stopped him." I tried to defend myself, but it was useless. Alex stood there looking sorry, and that was enough for her to let him off the hook. She turned her full fury on me, ranting about how I needed to set a better example. I didn't even bother arguing after that. What was the point? It wasn't just about taking the blame, though. Alex got all the praise, too. When I achieved something, it was met with lukewarm acknowledgement at best. In 5th grade, I won a citywide math competition. I came home with my little trophy, beaming, ready to share the good news. Mom glanced at it and said, "Good job, Liam," before turning back to her cooking. A few months later, Alex got a participation ribbon at a soccer tournament, and you'd think he'd won the World Cup. Mom threw a pizza party for him, inviting family and neighbors over to celebrate. When I asked why she didn't do anything for my math win, she said, "Alex needs encouragement. You're older. You don't need that kind of attention." My dad, he stayed quiet through all of this. It wasn't that he didn't care. He'd give me these small, sympathetic smiles when Mom went overboard, but he never stood up for me. I think he was afraid of upsetting her, or maybe he just didn't know how to handle her intensity. Either way, his silence made it clear I was on my own. This favoritism didn't end when we got older. If anything, it became more pronounced. I got into a prestigious university on a full scholarship, a result of years of hard work and sacrifice. My mom barely reacted. She didn't even visit me on move-in day. I packed up my life, got on the bus by myself, and set up my dorm room alone. It stung, but I told myself it was fine. I didn't need her approval. When Alex got into a local community college a few years later, Mom acted like it was the greatest achievement ever. She threw him a party, complete with balloons, a cake, and a slideshow of his high school highlights. They even bought him a used car as a congratulations gift. I couldn't believe it. I had to bike 5 miles to my part-time job during high school and save every penny just to afford textbooks. When I asked why they never helped me like that, Mom said, "You're independent, Liam. You didn't need our help. Alex's situation is different." Alex's situation included dropping out after 1 semester, but Mom wasn't even upset. "He's just figuring out what he wants to do," she said. "He'll find his path." Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs, studying full-time and barely scraping by. I didn't ask for their help again. I knew what the answer would be. Over the years, Alex jumped from one failed venture to another. He opened an online store that went under in a few months, tried starting an app but never finished it, and even dabbled in selling sports gear, which also flopped. Each time, Mom would bail him out, pouring money into his projects and assuring him he just needed to find himself. When I asked why she kept enabling him, she snapped, "He's talented, Liam. He just hasn't found his stride yet. We're his family. We have to support him." I didn't get that kind of support. I never asked for much, but even when I did, it was always the same response. "You're strong. You can handle it on your own." By the time I graduated, I had a chip on my shoulder the size of a boulder. I wanted to believe that my success would finally make her see me, but it never did. Every achievement of mine was overshadowed by Alex's failures and her relentless need to prop him up. It wasn't just the favoritism, it was the way it made me feel invisible. No matter how hard I tried, I was never enough. I could win awards, land a great job, and be completely self-sufficient, but it didn't matter. To her, Alex was always the priority. Dad's inaction hurt just as much, if not more. I knew he saw what was happening. He wasn't blind. But he never stood up for me. Never told Mom she was being unfair. His silence felt like betrayal. Looking back, I think I stayed quiet because I didn't know how to fight it. What do you do when your own mom doesn't see your worth? When your dad won't defend you? I thought if I worked hard enough, accomplished enough, it would change. But it didn't. By the time Emma came into my life, I was tired. Tired of fighting for recognition. Tired of trying to prove I mattered. I didn't realize it at the time, but meeting her was like a lifeline. For the first time in my life, someone saw me for who I was, not who I was supposed to be. I met Emma at a party I almost didn't go to. Alex had insisted I come along, pestering me for days. "Come on, Liam, you're so boring. Live a little," he said. I'd just gotten off a grueling double shift at work, so the last thing I wanted was to hang around Alex's loud friends. But in a rare moment of letting my guard down, I went. The party was the usual kind of chaos Alex thrived in. Booming music, people spilling drinks, and a haze of cigarette smoke clinging to the air. I lingered near the edge of the room, sipping on a beer and counting the minutes until I could slip out unnoticed. That's when I saw her. Emma was standing by the kitchen counter, laughing at something someone said. She had this way of commanding attention without even trying. It wasn't just her smile, it was her energy, her warmth. She looked up, caught my eye, and gave me a small, curious smile. I'm not the type to make the first move, but something about her made me feel braver than usual. I walked over and awkwardly introduced myself. "Hey, I'm Liam, Alex's older brother." "Alex has an older brother?" she said, her tone playful. "He never mentioned you." I laughed. "That doesn't surprise me. I'm usually in the background." We started talking, and before I knew it, the party felt like it had faded away. We talked about everything, our jobs, our favorite books, even the dumbest movies we loved as kids. Emma was sharp, funny, and easy to talk to. By the end of the night, I felt like I'd known her forever. Before she left, I asked for her number. She smiled, scribbled it on a napkin, and said, "Don't make me regret this." Our first date was at a small coffee shop. I was nervous, but Emma put me at ease right away. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. I couldn't believe someone like her would be interested in someone like me. Things moved fast after that, but not in a chaotic way. It all felt natural, like it was meant to happen. We started spending every free moment together. Movie nights turned into lazy Sunday mornings, and eventually I asked her to move in with me. Living with Emma was the happiest I'd ever been. She made our tiny apartment feel like a home. We'd stay up late talking about our dreams, our plans for the future. For the first time, I felt like I had someone in my corner, someone who saw me, not just the version of me my mom or Alex defined. A year into living together, I started thinking about proposing. I saved for months, cutting back on everything I could. The ring wasn't extravagant, just a simple platinum band with a small diamond, but it was exactly her style. On our 4th anniversary, I planned the perfect moment. We went for a walk in the park where we had our first date. I was shaking with nerves when I got down on one knee, but Emma's face lit up with a smile that erased every doubt I had. "Yes," she said, before I even finished asking. I thought my life was finally on track. For once, it felt like I had something Alex couldn't take away, something that was mine. When we announced our engagement, I was hopeful. I thought maybe this would be the moment my family would finally celebrate something I'd done. But my mom's reaction was underwhelming, to say the least. "Well, congratulations, I guess," she said with a forced smile. My dad muttered, "Good luck," like he was half distracted. And Alex? He didn't say much at all, just stood in the corner with this strange look on his face. It wasn't happiness, it was something I couldn't quite place at the time. After that, Alex started hanging around Emma more. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was always the charming one, the one who could make people laugh. I figured he was just being himself. But as time went on, his comments started to bother me. "You're lucky to have her," he'd say with a smirk. "I mean, I don't know how she puts up with you, but good for her." Emma would laugh it off, telling me, "He's just joking, don't let it bother you." But it did. Alex's presence started to feel invasive. He'd show up unannounced, linger too long, and ask Emma questions that felt too personal. "Are you sure Liam's the right guy for you?" he asked once, half joking. Emma brushed him off, but I couldn't shake the unease. I didn't want to come across as paranoid, so I kept quiet. Looking back, I wish I'd said something sooner. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but at least I wouldn't have felt so blindsided by what came next. After the engagement, life didn't feel as smooth as it used to. At first, I thought it was just the pressure of planning a wedding. Emma and I had decided to save up and pay for everything ourselves. We both worked long hours and skipped vacations to make it happen. I figured the stress was getting to us both. But something about Emma's behavior started to change. It wasn't immediate. It was subtle at first. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She used to tell me everything about her day, but now her answers felt clipped, like she was holding something back. Then there was her phone. Emma had always been casual about her phone, leaving it on the table or handing it to me when she needed me to check something. But now she kept it close, even taking it to the bathroom with her. If I walked into the room, she'd quickly lock the screen or flip it over. "What's up with your phone?" I asked her one evening, trying to keep my tone light. "Just work stuff," she said, not looking at me. Work stuff. That became her go-to answer for everything. But then she started coming home late. At first, it was once or twice a week, and her excuses sounded plausible. Meetings ran late, she got stuck finishing up a project. But over time, her stories stopped adding up. One night, I waited up for her, watching the clock tick past midnight. When she finally walked through the door, she looked startled to see me still awake. "Long night?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though my stomach was churning. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my eyes. "We had to finish a report, and then we grabbed drinks after. You know how it is." Except I didn't. Emma wasn't the type to grab drinks with coworkers, especially not without texting me, and the faint smell of wine on her breath wasn't from her usual go-to. There was also a subtle hint of cologne, not hers and not mine. I wanted to believe her, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind told me something wasn't right. A few weeks later, I noticed other changes. Emma started glowing in a way that felt different. She smiled more, but it wasn't her usual light-up-the-room smile. It was smaller, almost secretive. Her appetite shifted, and she started craving foods she used to hate. At first, I thought it was stress, or maybe a new diet trend she was trying out. Then it hit me. She might be pregnant. I was over the moon. Sure, we hadn't planned for it, but it felt like a sign that our future was coming together. I wanted to wait for her to share the news herself, so I didn't say anything. I spent days imagining how she'd tell me, how we'd celebrate, how our lives would change for the better. One evening, she finally sat me down. Her hands were shaking, and her face was pale. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. I smiled, thinking she was nervous about telling me the big news. "It's okay," I said. "You can tell me anything." She took a deep breath, and then the words came out. "I'm pregnant." I felt like I was floating. "That's amazing," I said, reaching for her hand. But she pulled away, tears streaming down her face. "Liam, it's not yours." For a moment, I didn't understand what she was saying. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible. Then they hit me, and it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "What do you mean it's not mine?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't even look at me. "It's Alex's." The world shattered. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to tell me it was a mistake or some cruel joke. But she didn't. "Emma told me everything, or at least enough to destroy me. She said it started at our engagement party. While I was busy talking to guests, Alex had cornered her. He told her she was making a mistake marrying me, that I didn't appreciate her. He'd played on every insecurity she had, planting seeds of doubt until she started believing him. "It just happened," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know why I let it." She tried to explain how Alex had promised her everything she thought I couldn't give. More attention, more affection, a better future. "He made me feel seen," she said, her voice breaking. I couldn't listen anymore. My chest felt like it was caving in. "Pack your things and leave," I said, my voice cold and unfamiliar. She tried to apologize, to explain, but I wasn't hearing it. By the time she walked out the door, I was left sitting in silence, staring at the life we'd built together, now in ruins. I called Alex that night. He picked up on the first ring, like he'd been expecting it. "What did you do?" I demanded. His response was as casual as if I'd asked him about the weather. "It was a mistake," he said. "It didn't mean anything." But when I pushed harder, his tone shifted. "Maybe if you were a better fiancé, this wouldn't have happened," he said, his words dripping with smugness. I saw red. I grabbed my keys and drove to his place, not thinking about what I'd do when I got there. When I pulled up, I saw my mom standing on the porch, arms crossed like she was waiting for me. My dad was next to her, looking exhausted before the confrontation had even started. "We need to talk," Mom said the second I stepped out of the car. "I don't have anything to say to him," I snapped, nodding toward the house where Alex was undoubtedly waiting. But she wasn't about to let me walk away. He didn't mean for this to happen, she said. Emma led him on. You have to forgive him. He's your brother. I stared at her in disbelief. Forgive him? He slept with my fiancée. He got her pregnant. He's your brother, she repeated, like that made it all okay. Family comes first. I looked at my dad, hoping for some kind of support, but he just looked away. In that moment, I knew I was on my own. After that night, it became clear that my family had already chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. For days after my confrontation with Alex and my parents, I avoided their calls. At first, I thought they'd let it go, but my mom was relentless. She left voicemail after voicemail, her tone switching between guilt-tripping and outright anger. Liam, you're being ridiculous. You're tearing this family apart, she said in one. My dad called too, but his messages were softer, almost apologetic. Your mom is upset. We just want to sit down and talk this through. It wasn't reassuring. If anything, it made me angrier. I didn't need a conversation. I needed them to understand how deeply they'd betrayed me. And it wasn't just them. My mom started rallying the extended family. Before long, aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years were calling, texting, even leaving comments on my social media posts. They all said the same thing. You have to forgive Alex. He's your brother. Families go through rough patches. You'll regret cutting him out. It was like they didn't even care about what Alex had done. No one mentioned the betrayal, the lies, or the fact that he had knowingly destroyed my relationship. Instead, they framed it as a misunderstanding, that I was blowing out of proportion. One night, I got a call from my cousin Katie. She's one of the few relatives I've always been close with, so I answered, hoping for some kind of support. Liam, I just heard, she said, her voice hesitant. Please don't tell me you're calling to defend Alex, I said. No, she replied quickly. I think what he did is disgusting. I don't understand why everyone is blaming you. I let out a bitter laugh, because that's how it's always been. Alex can do no wrong, and I'm the one who's expected to clean up the mess. Katie didn't argue. She knew I was right. I just wanted to check on you. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Her words meant more than I could express. She was one of the only people who saw what was happening for what it was, a complete and utter betrayal. But most of the family wasn't like Katie. They bought into my mom's narrative that Alex was the victim, that Emma had seduced him, and that I was overreacting by refusing to forgive them. My mom even had the audacity to suggest I reach out to Emma and help her through this. Help her? I snapped when she brought it up over the phone. That's your solution? After what they did to me? She's pregnant, Liam, Mom said, as if that justified everything. The baby is innocent in all of this. You can't just walk away. I don't owe that baby or them anything, I said before hanging up. But it didn't stop there. My mom started showing up at my apartment. The first time, she knocked on the door for nearly an hour before finally leaving. The second time, she camped out in her car across the street, waiting for me to come outside. It was unsettling, to say the least. I started taking alternate routes home and avoided going out unless I absolutely had to. But she wasn't the only one escalating things. One afternoon at work, I got a call from the front desk. Hi, Liam. There's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother. I froze. Tell her I'm busy, I said. Mom didn't take the hint. Instead, she started spinning stories to my coworkers. One of them, Clara, approached me later that day with a concerned expression. Hey, is everything okay? Your mom was here, and she said you were refusing to help your family. She seemed really upset. I wanted to scream. Instead, I muttered, she's overstepping, and left it at that. Things came to a head when Alex showed up at my gym one evening. It was my safe space, the one place I could go to clear my head. I was mid-workout when I spotted him near the entrance, that same smug grin plastered on his face. I ignored him at first, hoping he'd leave, but he didn't. Instead, he sauntered over to the bench press where I was working out. Well, look who it is, he said, leaning casually against the equipment. Still mad about Emma? I didn't respond. I put my earbuds back in and moved to another machine, but he followed me. Come on, Liam, lighten up. It's not like you were perfect. Maybe if you'd been a better fiancé, she wouldn't have come to me. My fists clenched, but I kept my focus on the weights. Admit it, he continued. You're just mad because I'm better at giving her what she needed. That was it. I turned to him, my voice low but firm. Get out, Alex. Now. He laughed. Or what? You gonna run crying to Mom? The next thing I knew, we were in a full-blown fight. I swung first, I won't deny it, but he shoved me into the bench before I could land another hit. The gym staff broke it up before things got worse, but I left with a split lip and a bruise forming on my shoulder. The incident only added fuel to the fire. Alex filed a police report, claiming I'd assaulted him without provocation. My mom backed him up, of course, spinning the story to make me look like the aggressor. It was the final straw. The next day, I filed for a restraining order against Alex and my parents. When they found out, Mom called, furious. "How could you do this to us? We're your family. You stopped being my family the moment you sided with him," I said before hanging up. The court hearing was a nightmare. Mom cried, telling the judge it was all a misunderstanding. Alex played the victim, claiming he'd only come to the gym to talk and that I'd attacked him out of nowhere. But I had evidence. Texts, voicemails, and even security footage from the gym painted a very different picture. The judge wasn't buying their story. The restraining order was granted, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. After the restraining order was granted, I thought things might finally settle down. I was wrong. The silence from my family didn't last long. A week after the court hearing, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my mom. The letter was handwritten, pages long, and dripping with guilt-laden phrases like, "You're breaking my heart," and "How could you do this to your family?" She went on about how Alex had made a mistake, how Emma wasn't innocent in this either, and how the restraining order was a betrayal. She ended it with, "We'll always be your family, no matter how hard you try to push us away." I tore the letter in half and threw it in the trash. But it didn't stop there. My relatives started calling again. Apparently, Mom had told them about the restraining order, but only her version of the story. In her narrative, I was the vengeful son tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. "You're being so dramatic, Liam," my aunt said during one call. "This is just family drama. Everyone has it." Another relative chimed in with, "You can't stay mad forever. What's done is done. Focus on the baby. It's not their fault." It was like they all shared a script, each trying to guilt me into forgiving Alex and coming back to the family. None of them cared about the betrayal, the lies, or the emotional toll it had taken on me. The final straw came when my mom showed up at my workplace again, despite the restraining order. This time, she brought Alex with her. I spotted them in the parking lot as I was leaving for lunch. They were standing by my car, Mom waving her arms like she was lecturing someone. Alex leaned against the hood, arms crossed, smirking like he always did when he thought he had the upper hand. "Liam!" Mom called when she saw me. "We need to talk!" I turned on my heel and started walking back toward the building, but Alex's voice stopped me. "Running away again?" "Typical," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I spun around, keeping my distance. "You're violating a court order," I said, my voice steady. "Leave, or I'll call the police." Mom looked offended. "We're just trying to fix this. You're being unreasonable." "There's nothing to fix," I said. "You chose your side. Now deal with the consequences." Alex pushed off the car, taking a step closer. "You're pathetic," he sneered. "You can't even face your own family." Before I could respond, a coworker came outside and quietly asked if I needed help. I nodded, grateful for the backup. Alex muttered something under his breath, but they both left before the situation escalated. That night, I realized I couldn't stay. The restraining order had given me some protection, but it wasn't enough. They knew where I lived, where I worked, and they had no intention of leaving me alone. The next day, I made up my mind. I was going to leave town, start fresh somewhere far away from them. Packing up my life wasn't easy. I sold most of my belongings, keeping only the essentials. As I packed, I couldn't help but think about all the times I'd tried to make things work with my family. The holidays where I felt invisible, the milestones they barely acknowledged, the constant comparisons to Alex. By the time I sealed the last box, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I wasn't just leaving behind my family. I was leaving behind years of hurt and disappointment. Before I left, I called my cousin Katie to let her know what I was doing. She was one of the few people who had supported me through all of this. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "It's a big step." "I'm sure," I said. "I can't keep living like this, Katie. They'll never change." She didn't argue. "If you need anything, call me," she said. "And don't forget, you deserve better than what they've given you." Her words stuck with me. The day I left, I didn't tell anyone except Katie. I packed up my car, deleted my old social media accounts, and started driving. As I crossed the state line, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. I didn't know what my future held, but I knew one thing. It wouldn't include them. Emma's life fell apart faster than even I expected. Alex left her a few months into her pregnancy, disappearing without so much as a goodbye. He left her with no money, no plan, and absolutely no support. I didn't hear about it directly, of course. I'd cut all ties with my family, and I had no intention of reopening old wounds. But they couldn't leave me alone. Katie, my cousin, was the first to tell me. Did you hear about Alex? She asked during a rare phone call. No, I said bluntly, already dreading what she might say. He left Emma, just up and vanished. She's a wreck, and now her parents have disowned her because of the whole situation. They said she brought shame to the family. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Emma had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. But part of me couldn't help but feel a sliver of pity. As much as I hated what she'd done to me, I wouldn't wish Alex's betrayal on anyone. Katie continued, her voice softer. She's staying in some cheap motel now, barely scraping by. Her family won't even speak to her. It's bad, Liam. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to laugh and say, serves her right. But all I felt was a hollow ache, like the final chapter of a book I never wanted to read. Alex's disappearance didn't surprise me. He'd never been one to stick around when things got tough. But what did surprise me was how my mom reacted. Or didn't react, rather. She's making excuses for him again, Katie said during another call. She's telling everyone he just needs time to figure things out. Can you believe that? Of course I can, I replied bitterly. That's what she's been doing his whole life. But this time, her excuses weren't landing as well as they used to. Even my dad, who had always been passive, seemed fed up. Katie told me he'd started spending more time at work, avoiding the house entirely. Your dad looks miserable, she said. I think he's finally seeing the damage your mom's favoritism has done. But you know him. He won't say anything. It didn't matter to me anymore. I wasn't interested in what my parents thought or how they were coping. They'd chosen Alex over me time and time again, and now they could deal with the fallout. Emma's family cutting her off added another layer to the mess. From what I heard, they were furious when they found out about her affair with Alex. They'd initially supported her when we got engaged, but once the truth came out, they wanted nothing to do with her. Her dad called her a disgrace, Katie said. Can you imagine hearing that from your own parent? I could. In a way, Emma was experiencing the same rejection I'd felt my entire life. The difference was, she'd brought it on herself. The guilt tripping from my mom intensified after Alex left Emma. She called from unknown numbers, left voicemails, and even sent me emails. You're still her fiancé in a way, one message said. You should help her, Liam. The baby is innocent in all of this. Another email read, family means stepping up even when it's hard. I raised you better than this. I deleted them without responding. When I continued to ignore her, my mom resorted to sending other relatives after me. Aunts, uncles, even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly started calling and texting. You can't let Emma struggle like this, one cousin said. She's pregnant, Liam. Don't be so cold. She's carrying your niece or nephew, another said. That baby needs a family. They made it sound like I was the villain for walking away. No one seemed to care about what Emma and Alex had done to me. No one wanted to talk about the betrayal, the lies, or the years of favoritism that had driven me to cut ties in the first place. Katie, as always, was the only one who saw things clearly. Don't let them guilt you, she said. You've done nothing wrong. This is their mess, not yours. Her words were a lifeline. Despite everything, I stayed firm in my decision to stay away. I knew that getting involved would only drag me back into the chaos I'd fought so hard to escape. Emma's struggles weren't my responsibility, and neither was Alex's absence. I kept my focus on rebuilding my life. Therapy helped me work through the lingering anger and resentment, and I found peace in the little things. Taking Max for long walks, exploring my new city, and meeting people who knew nothing about my past. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder how things might have been different. If my mom had treated me fairly, if Alex hadn't betrayed me, if Emma had made different choices. But those thoughts were fleeting. I'd learned that dwelling on the past only kept me tethered to it. Emma's story became just another chapter in the long list of reasons I had to cut ties with my family. I didn't take joy in her suffering, but I didn't feel obligated to fix it either. Life is about choices. Emma and Alex made theirs, and I made mine. For the first time in my life, I chose myself, and I don't regret it.
Life was moving smoothly, and our family was content. But then, a newcomer entered our lives, and while we initially welcomed her with open arms, she soon brought a storm of chaos and deceit that I could never have imagined. Hi, I'm Elena. I'm 34 years old and run a successful event planning business here in Chicago. My life has always been a whirlwind of planning weddings, organizing corporate events, and making sure every detail is perfect. But no matter how hectic things get at work, the one constant in my life has always been my younger brother, David. We've always been incredibly close. David, now 30, runs his own marketing firm, and despite our busy careers, we've always made time for each other. Growing up, our family was as tight-knit as you could imagine. Our parents are retired now, enjoying their golden years with a calm and serene lifestyle. They raised us to be supportive and loyal, and that's something David and I have always taken to heart. We shared everything and had each other's backs, which made the events of the past year all the more jarring. It started when David introduced us to Mia. I remember it vividly. David was bubbling with excitement one evening when he called me. "Elena, you won't believe it. I've met someone amazing. Her name is Mia, and I think she's the one." I was thrilled for him. David and I have always shared our lives openly, and the thought of him finding someone special made me happy. He invited Mia to a family dinner, and I remember feeling a mix of anticipation and curiosity. When Mia walked in, she was charming and charismatic. At first glance, she seemed to fit right in with our family. As weeks passed, Mia became a regular fixture at our family gatherings. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Mia was always smiling, chatting with everyone, and making polite conversation. But I started to notice little things that seemed off. She would make these subtle, passive-aggressive comments, always veiled in sweetness, but edged with criticism. For instance, during one family dinner, she commented with a smile, "Oh, Elena, still working those late nights? Don't worry, you'll find balance one day." I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was just being overly sensitive. But these comments kept coming. They were little digs at my career, my lifestyle, and even my choices. I told myself to ignore it. After all, David was so head over heels in love with Mia, and our parents seemed to adore her. Over time, Mia's influence over David grew stronger. He became more withdrawn and seemed to depend on Mia's opinions for everything. It was as if the once confident and independent David was slowly being molded into someone new, someone who distanced himself from his family. I noticed how he started siding with Mia in every argument, and it was getting harder to have a meaningful conversation with him without Mia's shadow looming over us. Family dinners became increasingly tense. Mia's remarks were no longer just passive-aggressive. They were more direct and pointed. At first, I tried to maintain the peace, but it was becoming more and more challenging. My feelings of unease grew as I saw how David seemed to be changing, becoming quieter and more distant. One particular evening, the tension reached a boiling point. We were having a family dinner at our parents' house. The table was set, and everyone was chatting pleasantly. Well, everyone except Mia and me. She had been making snide remarks throughout the meal, and I could feel the simmering frustration building up inside me. Then, out of nowhere, Mia made a shocking accusation. She stood up abruptly, her face red with indignation. "Elena, I need to speak to you. I've been missing my wallet. It had $10,000 in cash and several credit cards. I have reason to believe that you've stolen it and been using my credit cards without my permission." The room fell silent. Everyone's eyes were on me, and I was stunned.
What?
"Mia, that's not true. I haven't taken anything from you," I protested. But Mia wasn't done. In a dramatic gesture, she picked up a glass of water and threw it at me. The cold water drenched me, and I could feel the humiliation spreading across my face. My parents and David looked on in shock. David's expression was one of confusion, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his sister. I tried to defend myself, but Mia's accusations were like a storm, drowning out my voice. "I would never do something like that. Mia, you know me better than this," I said, struggling to keep my composure. David was caught in the middle, his eyes darting between Mia and me. "Elena, is there something you want to tell us?" he asked, his voice betraying his confusion. "I don't know what's happening here, but I swear I didn't steal anything," I said, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. The dinner ended in chaos, and I was left feeling humiliated and isolated. After the dinner, I couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal and injustice. I confided in my best friend, Lily. "I don't know what's going on, but Mia is up to something. I can't believe she'd accuse me like that." Lily listened intently. "I've noticed how Mia's been treating you. It's not right. Maybe we should look into this. There might be more to her than meets the eye." And that's when I decided I needed to find out the truth about Mia. I knew something was wrong, and I was determined to uncover what it was, no matter where it led. After that humiliating dinner, I couldn't just sit back and let things slide. Mia's accusation had shaken me to my core. I knew I had to find out the truth about her if I wanted to clear my name and protect my family. I reached out to my best friend, Lily, who had always been a voice of reason and support in my life. "Lily, I need your help," I said when we met for coffee the next day. "Something's seriously wrong with Mia, and I can't shake the feeling that she's hiding something." Lily's eyes widened with concern. "What happened, Elena?" I recounted the events from the dinner, the accusations, the water thrown in my face, and David's torn expression. "I just can't believe David's wife would accuse me of something so terrible without any proof." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "We need to look into Mia's background. There has to be something we can find that explains her behavior." I agreed, and we decided to start digging. The first step was to learn more about Mia's past. Lily suggested reaching out to people who might know more about her. I remembered Mia mentioning her previous job at a marketing firm before she met David. "Maybe someone from her old job might know something," Lily said. That's when we contacted Olivia, a former coworker of Mia. Olivia had left the firm a few months before Mia, and Lily was able to track her down. We arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe. Olivia was hesitant at first, but agreed to talk once she realized we were genuinely concerned. When we met Olivia, she looked nervous but determined. "I don't know if this will help, but Mia wasn't exactly well-liked at the firm," Olivia began. "She was known for being manipulative and deceitful. There were rumors about her getting involved in some shady activities, but nothing was ever proven." I listened intently, feeling a mix of dread and curiosity. "What kind of activities are we talking about?" Olivia hesitated before continuing. "There were incidents where money went missing, and Mia was always at the center of those situations. I'm not saying she's guilty, but it's strange how things seemed to disappear whenever she was around. She also had a tendency to pit people against each other. I wouldn't be surprised if she's up to something now." Her words sent chills down my spine. I knew I needed more concrete information, so Lily and I decided to hire a private investigator. I contacted a reputable firm in Chicago, and they agreed to take on the case. We provided them with as much information as we had about Mia, including her previous job and any connections she might have. The private investigator, Mark, was thorough and professional. He promised to keep us updated and began his work immediately. As days passed, the tension was unbearable. Every time my phone rang, my heart skipped a beat, hoping for news. Then, one afternoon, Mark called with some shocking revelations. "Elena, I have some information you need to hear. Mia has been using multiple aliases and has a history of fraud." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" Mark explained that Mia was not who she claimed to be. She had used different names to open various accounts and had been involved in several fraudulent activities. Most alarming was her involvement in money laundering. The amount she had funneled through various schemes added up to over $500,000. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "This is unbelievable. How has she managed to stay under the radar for so long?"
Mark sighed.
"She's very good at covering her tracks. But the evidence we've gathered shows a clear pattern of deceit. She's been manipulating people to cover her tracks and keep her schemes running smoothly." The news was devastating. I had suspected Mia was trouble, but I never imagined she was capable of such large-scale fraud. My main concern now was how to approach David with this information. I knew he would be devastated, and I was torn between wanting to protect him and fearing that exposing Mia might drive him further away. I decided to confront Mia directly. I called David and asked him to meet at a neutral location, one where we could talk without interruptions. David arrived looking anxious, and I could see the concern in his eyes. "David, I need to talk to you about Mia," I started, my voice trembling. "I've found out some disturbing information." David's face fell. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I took a deep breath and tried to explain everything we had discovered about Mia's fraudulent activities and her history of deceit. I showed him some of the evidence we had gathered, including statements from Olivia and documents from the private investigator. David looked overwhelmed. "Elena, I don't know what to say. This is all so much to take in." I could see the pain in his eyes, and it broke my heart. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I couldn't let you be deceived any longer. Mia has been manipulating all of us, and it's time we face the truth. David's expression was a mix of disbelief and anger. How could I have been so blind? I trusted her completely. I put a comforting hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this. We have to act quickly to protect you and your business from any further damage. We both knew that the road ahead would be challenging. The revelations about Mia were just the beginning, and I was determined to help David confront the situation head-on, no matter how difficult it would be. The days after my confrontation with David were a whirlwind of anxiety and heartbreak. He had taken the evidence seriously, but the emotional toll was evident. David's disbelief and anger were palpable as he grappled with the betrayal of someone he had once loved and trusted implicitly. Meanwhile, I was determined to see this through, no matter how painful it was for all of us. David and I decided to act quickly. We knew that Mia's fraudulent activities could have dire consequences for his business and our family's reputation. To get to the bottom of things, we needed to expose Mia for who she truly was and stop her before she could cause any more damage. The first step was to organize a family meeting. I felt a knot in my stomach as I prepared for what was about to unfold. David and I agreed that confronting Mia in front of the family would be the best way to reveal the truth and hold her accountable. We hoped that once the family saw the evidence, they would understand why David and I were taking these drastic measures. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon, and I could hardly contain my nerves. I knew this would be a pivotal moment, and the stakes were incredibly high. I asked Lily to join us for support. Her presence would provide a sense of solidarity and reassurance. When the day arrived, the atmosphere was tense. We gathered in the living room of our family home, which had always been a place of comfort and warmth. Now, it felt like the stage for an impending storm. My parents, David, and Mia were all seated, looking puzzled by the unusual seriousness of the meeting. Mia, David, thank you for coming, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. There's something important we need to discuss. David took a deep breath. I've discovered some troubling information about Mia. I need to show everyone what we've found. Mia's face tightened with apprehension, though she tried to maintain a calm demeanor. What's this about, David? Why are we having this meeting? Before David could respond, I stepped forward and placed the pile of documents and evidence on the coffee table. These are records and testimonies from a private investigator. They reveal a lot about Mia's past and her current activities. I saw Mia's eyes widen as David began to go through the documents. As he explained Mia's history of deceit, including her use of aliases and involvement in fraudulent schemes, the room grew quieter. My parents, who had always trusted Mia and welcomed her into the family, looked increasingly distressed. Mia has been using multiple names to commit fraud, David said, his voice strained. She's involved in money laundering that has affected my business, and it's estimated to be over $500,000. My parents exchanged worried glances, struggling to process the gravity of the situation. Is this true, Mia? My mother asked, her voice trembling. Mia's facade began to crack. She looked around, trying to maintain her composure, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. David, Elena, you don't understand. This is all a misunderstanding. David's eyes were filled with hurt. How could this be a misunderstanding? We have proof of your crimes. You've been manipulating us all. Mia's calm demeanor shattered. You're all fools. You think you can just throw me away like this? I've worked hard to build my life. You've ruined everything. In a fit of rage, Mia grabbed a glass of water from the table and threw it at me, soaking my clothes and the documents. The dramatic outburst left everyone in shock. My father stood up, his face flushed with anger. How dare you accuse Elena and throw water at her? You have no right to treat our family like this. Mia's outburst was a desperate attempt to deflect attention from her guilt. I don't need to stay here and be accused. You can all believe whatever lies you want. Just as Mia was about to leave, the sound of sirens pierced the tension in the room. The police arrived, responding to a tip-off about Mia's fraudulent activities. I had anticipated that Mia might try to flee, so I had discreetly contacted law enforcement, hoping they would arrive in time. The police officers entered the room and began to question Mia. They had a warrant based on the evidence we provided, and Mia's attempts to deny the charges only added to her desperation. As the officers escorted her out, she continued to protest, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. David, still in shock, looked at me with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. I can't believe this is happening. I never thought Mia would be capable of something like this. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We had to do what was necessary to protect you and our family. It was the right thing to do. As Mia was taken away, I could see the toll the situation had taken on David. He was devastated, and I knew that the road to recovery would be long. But at least the truth was out, and the manipulative shadow Mia cast over our lives was finally being lifted. The family meeting had been a turning point, but it was far from the end of our troubles. We had to navigate the aftermath of the scandal and support David as he worked to rebuild his business and process the betrayal. For now, all we could do was face the challenges ahead, knowing that the truth had come to light and that we had taken a stand for justice. The aftermath of Mia's arrest was a whirlwind of emotions and challenges for David and me. The shock of discovering Mia's true nature was still fresh, and the process of recovering from her deceit felt overwhelming. It was a time of intense reflection and difficult decisions. In the weeks following Mia's arrest, David faced a barrage of legal and financial issues. The fraud she had perpetrated not only tainted his business reputation but also threatened its very existence. With the help of his legal team, he worked tirelessly to untangle the mess Mia had left behind. The stress was immense, and David was often seen buried under piles of paperwork and financial reports. I stayed by David's side, offering support and helping him navigate the complexities of the situation. Our family came together, united by the desire to help David recover and rebuild. My parents, though shaken, were determined to offer their unconditional support. They often reminded David that he was not alone and that we would face these trials as a family. Lily, my steadfast friend, remained a crucial part of our support network. She helped me manage the emotional strain and provided invaluable assistance with gathering and organizing evidence. Her dedication and encouragement were instrumental in keeping me focused and grounded. David's path to recovery was fraught with obstacles. The legal battles were time-consuming and draining, and the damage to his business was substantial. However, he was determined to fight back and restore his company's reputation. He sought help from financial experts and worked with law enforcement to ensure that Mia's accomplices, if any, were also brought to justice. As the weeks turned into months, David began to see some progress. The business slowly started to recover, thanks in large part to the efforts of his dedicated staff and supportive clients. It was a long and challenging road, but David's resilience and determination began to pay off. Meanwhile, Mia's legal troubles continued. Her trial was a highly publicized affair, with the media eagerly covering the sensational details of her fraud. The courtroom drama unfolded as testimonies from victims like Olivia and others were presented. Mia's attempts to manipulate and spin the narrative fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. The judicial system worked diligently to ensure that justice was served. David and I attended the trial, seeking closure and a sense of justice. Seeing Mia's demeanor in court was both unsettling and validating. Her arrogance and contempt for the truth were starkly revealed, and it was clear that she had been living a lie for a long time. When the verdict was finally delivered, Mia was found guilty of multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to a significant prison term. The judge's decision was a bittersweet moment for us. While it brought some measure of justice, the scars of her actions would take time to heal. In the months following Mia's conviction, our family began the slow process of rebuilding. The experience had tested our bonds, but it also reinforced our commitment to one another. David worked hard to repair his business and regain the trust of his clients and partners. It wasn't easy, but each small victory was a step towards recovery. David also began to open up more about his feelings and the impact of Mia's betrayal. He sought therapy to process the emotional toll and to work through his feelings of guilt and anger. It was a painful but necessary journey, and I supported him every step of the way. As for me, I found solace in knowing that I had stood up for what was right and protected my family. The ordeal had been a profound test of our loyalty and resilience, but it had also taught us the importance of trust and perseverance. I had learned that confronting uncomfortable truths was not always easy, but it was crucial for preserving the integrity of our family. Our family gatherings, once strained and tense, gradually returned to a sense of normalcy. Though the scars of the past remained, we chose to focus on the future and the strength we had found in each other. We celebrated small victories and cherished the moments of togetherness that had become even more precious. Reflecting on this journey, I realized that the experience, though painful, had taught us invaluable lessons. We learned the importance of vigilance, the power of truth, and the unbreakable bond of family. Despite the trials and tribulations, we emerged stronger and more united. As I look back on these events, I am reminded of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of standing up for what is right. Our family story is a testament to the strength of love and loyalty, even in the face of adversity. We have faced our darkest moments and emerged into the light, ready to embrace the future with hope and determination. The story of Mia's deception and the subsequent journey of healing and rebuilding is a powerful reminder that even in the most challenging times, the bonds of family and the pursuit of justice can lead to a brighter, more resilient future.